The station's gravity had just reached 1.8 gs. Every alien trainee was on the floor. The human was still walking. The words appeared on a holographic screen suspended above the central atrium of the Galactic Academy Research Complex, frozen in the official incident log that would later be studied across 17 star systems. At that moment, however, nobody was thinking about history. Nobody was thinking about reports. They were simply staring. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the steel framework beneath their feet. Emergency lights painted the polished walls in pulses of amber and white. The air smelled faintly of ozone and overheated circuitry. Hundreds of students crowded observation platforms overlooking the gravity testing chamber below. Most of them had spent years studying Earth from a safe distance. They had analyzed human physiology. They had memorized skeletal density charts. They had reviewed muscle fiber reports and environmental adaptation studies. They knew Earth possessed unusually high gravity compared to most inhabited worlds. They knew humans evolved under conditions many species considered excessive. They knew all the numbers. At least they thought they did. Lyra Vane stood near the front of the viewing deck, her sapphire skin reflecting the rotating emergency lights. Her silver hair drifted slightly as the station's environmental systems adjusted airflow throughout the chamber. Like every other researcher present, she was focused on the massive gravity simulator below. The machine occupied nearly half the testing bay. Rings of reinforced alloy rotated around a central platform surrounded by diagnostic equipment and monitoring stations. According to the display above it, gravity levels had exceeded normal operating parameters by nearly 80%. For most species in attendance, even standing upright inside that field would have been impossible. Yet one figure remained visible on the central platform. Ethan Walker, 34 years old. Human. Earthborn. Maintenance engineer. Nothing about him looked extraordinary. His brown work jacket carried faint grease stains near the sleeves. His boots were scuffed. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, and somehow that made the sight even more unsettling. While warning sirens echoed through the bay, Ethan continued moving toward a disabled power junction near the far wall. One step, then another. Slow, steady, deliberate. Several technicians nearby had already collapsed into seated positions, unable to continue. Automated safety systems attempted to compensate. Gravity alarms flashed brighter. The station computer repeated evacuation warnings in 6 languages. Ethan kept walking. That can't be right, one alien student whispered behind Lyra. The readings must be wrong. Another shook her head. The readings have been verified 3 times. Silence spread through the observation deck. Nobody seemed willing to blink. Ethan finally reached the damaged control panel. He crouched beside it, opened an access cover, and began examining internal components as if the entire situation were merely an inconvenience delaying his lunch break. Lyra stared at the monitor displaying his vital signs. Elevated, but stable. The numbers made no sense. She had spent 6 years researching Earth adaptation. She had reviewed thousands of scientific documents. None of them had prepared her for this. Then Ethan did something that would later appear in every official report. A nearby technician lost balance while attempting to disconnect a power relay. The worker's tool kit slipped free, scattering equipment across the platform. Without hesitation, Ethan stood, crossed several yards against the crushing gravity, picked up the heavy container with one hand, and carried it back. The technician stared at him. Ethan simply smiled and said something lost beneath the alarms. Whatever he said caused the exhausted worker to laugh. Under 1.8 gs, Lyra felt a strange sensation she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear. It wasn't admiration. Not yet. It was something far more dangerous for a scientist. Curiosity. Because for the first time since joining the academy, she realized the reports might have been wrong. Not factually wrong. Something worse. Incomplete. The data explained how humans survived Earth's gravity. It did not explain why a man like Ethan Walker could stand in the middle of impossible conditions and still find a reason to help someone else. The official explanation arrived 12 hours later. It did not help. By the next morning, every display screen inside the academy carried a detailed technical report explaining that the gravity surge had been caused by a calibration failure inside the rotational field generators. Engineers presented charts. Physicists offered equations. Administrators distributed safety updates. None of it answered the question everyone was actually asking. The corridors buzzed with conversation as students moved between lecture halls beneath towering glass ceilings. Discussions followed the same pattern everywhere. They started with gravity. They ended with Ethan Walker. Lyra noticed it immediately. She heard his name in cafeterias, laboratories, transit stations, and research forums. Some students claimed humans possessed hidden biological advantages. Others argued that Earth training programs must be more extreme than public records suggested. One group insisted the entire event had been exaggerated by faulty sensors. That theory lasted less than an hour. Video footage from the testing bay had already spread across the Academy network. The recordings showed exactly what everyone had witnessed. Ethan had walked through conditions that left trained specialists struggling to stand. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Lyra spent most of the morning reviewing archived research. Holographic displays floated above her workstation inside the xenobiology department. Human skeletal density reports, muscle efficiency studies, cardiovascular adaptation analyses. Thousands of pages of information filled the air around her. Yet the deeper she looked, the less satisfied she became. The numbers explained mechanics. They did not explain behavior. A soft chime interrupted her concentration. A message appeared on the display. Observation assignment approved. Subject, Ethan Walker. Location, Maintenance Sector 4. Lyra blinked twice. She had submitted the request only an hour earlier. Apparently, the Academy administration was just as curious as everyone else. 40 minutes later, she stepped into Maintenance Sector 4. The atmosphere could not have been more different from the pristine research wing. Warm air carried the scent of machine oil and fresh metal shavings. Cooling fans hummed overhead. Automated cargo carts rolled through wide service corridors carrying equipment between departments. Somewhere in the distance, a power wrench rattled against steel. Lyra followed the sound. She found Ethan standing atop a maintenance platform nearly 20 feet above the floor. A large access panel hung open beside him. Thick bundles of cable disappeared into the station wall. Ethan leaned forward, tightened a connector, then climbed down the ladder with steady movements. No audience, no cameras, no emergency, just work. He reached the floor carrying a heavy equipment case and nearly walked past before noticing her. "You are staring again," he said with a faint smile. Lyra felt unexpected embarrassment. "I am conducting research." "That sounds more official." He set the case beside a transport cart. "What are you researching?" "You." Ethan laughed. The sound echoed softly through the corridor. "That seems like a lot of effort for a maintenance guy. You are not helping my investigation." "Sorry." He was still smiling. "What exactly are you trying to figure out?" Lyra hesitated. The honest answer sounded ridiculous even to her. "I am trying to understand why none of the reports match reality." Ethan looked at her for a moment before glancing toward the equipment cart. Maybe because reports only measure what people can do. He lifted the case and secured it onto the transport platform. Reality measures what people choose to do. Before Lyra could respond, a loud alert sounded from farther down the corridor. One of the cargo lifts had stopped moving. Several workers gathered nearby, examining a diagnostic display. Ethan immediately headed toward them. No hesitation. No complaints. Just movement. Lyra followed at a distance. She watched him kneel beside the disabled machine. He listened carefully to the technicians. Asked questions. Checked readings. Within minutes, he was helping solve a problem that was not even assigned to him. Nobody ordered him to stop. Nobody ordered him to help. He simply saw an issue and stepped forward. Standing there among the noise of machinery and flashing diagnostic screens, Lyra felt the same unsettling realization return. The gravity incident had not been the mystery. The real mystery was Ethan Walker himself. 3 days later, Ethan Walker became the most discussed subject inside the Academy without realizing it. He never attended the debates. He never read the forum threads. He never checked the endless stream of comments appearing across the research network. While professors argued and students exchanged theories, Ethan spent his mornings exactly the same way he always had. He fixed things. The Academy itself stretched nearly 3 miles from end to end, a floating city of laboratories, lecture halls, living quarters, and engineering sectors suspended in orbit above the neutral world of Vera Prime. Every day something malfunctioned. A climate regulator drifted out of calibration. A cargo conveyor developed timing issues. A laboratory sensor produced inconsistent readings. Ethan simply moved from one problem to the next with a tool kit in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. The routine should have been boring. Instead, it fascinated people, especially the alien students assigned to observe him. Lyra noticed the pattern first. Every report submitted by the observation teams contained the same strange conclusion. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet somehow everyone remained impressed. On the fourth day, the Academy authorized a controlled adaptation study. Volunteers from several species would spend 1 hour inside an Earth-standard environment chamber. The chamber simulated average conditions found in many regions of Earth. 1 gravity, standard atmospheric pressure, normal oxygen levels, moderate temperature. According to every scientific model, the experience should have been manageable. The Academy auditorium filled quickly. Students packed the observation seats overlooking the testing floor below. Some arrived carrying data tablets. Others carried betting pools disguised as statistical forecasts. A few looked genuinely nervous. Lyra stood beside the central monitoring station while the first volunteer entered the chamber. Nearest Tal stepped through the pressure doors wearing a lightweight monitoring harness. The young researcher was considered physically above average for her species. She smiled confidently at the crowd before the chamber activated. At first nothing happened. Then the additional gravity settled onto her frame. Her posture changed immediately. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing deepened. After 7 minutes, she requested a rest period. After 12 minutes, she sat down. At 18 minutes, she voluntarily ended the test. The second volunteer lasted 26 minutes. The third lasted 31. The fourth completed the full hour but emerged exhausted and drenched in perspiration. Throughout the experiment, one person remained quietly seated near the rear wall. Ethan watched with mild curiosity while drinking coffee from a paper cup. When the final volunteer finished, Professor Darnus adjusted his glasses and addressed the audience. "The results are entirely consistent with our projections," he announced. "Earth gravity places continuous strain upon biological systems not adapted to such conditions." Several students nodded. The explanation sounded reasonable. Then someone near the front raised a hand. How long could the human remain inside? Silence followed. The professor hesitated. Theoretically, another student answered before he could. His entire life. Laughter spread across the room. Not mocking laughter. Nervous laughter. The kind people used when confronted with something difficult to comprehend. Ethan finally stood and tossed his empty cup into a recycling unit. "You know," he said casually, "most people back home would not even think about gravity during the day." The room became quiet again. Lyra watched dozens of students exchange confused looks. To them, gravity had become the defining feature of Earth. Entire research programs existed because of it. Academic careers had been built around understanding it. Yet Ethan spoke about it the way someone might mention the weather. Ordinary, familiar, unremarkable. As he headed toward the exit, Zara Solis called out from the audience. "How do humans get used to carrying that much weight all the time?" Ethan stopped near the doorway. For a moment he appeared to consider the question seriously. Then he smiled. "You do not notice the weight after a while." He pushed open the door and stepped into the corridor. "You notice what is worth carrying." The door closed behind him. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Lyra looked down at her untouched notes. For the first time since beginning her research, she realized she was no longer studying a physical phenomenon. She was studying a perspective, and somehow that was proving far harder to measure. The observation program was originally scheduled to last 1 week. By the end of the 6th day, the Academy quietly extended it to a full month. Nobody complained. In fact, requests for access doubled. Students who had never shown interest in human studies suddenly rearranged their schedules to follow maintenance reports and engineering assignments. Professors pretended to disapprove while secretly reviewing the same footage as everyone else. The phenomenon had become impossible to ignore. Ethan Walker was not performing extraordinary feats every day. The strange part was that he never seemed to know which of his actions others considered extraordinary. On a quiet afternoon, Lyra found herself riding a cargo elevator toward one of the Academy's outer support rings. The elevator groaned softly as it climbed through nearly 800 feet of structural framework. Transparent panels revealed endless stars beyond the station hall. Ethan stood beside a stack of replacement power cells, reading diagnostic notes on a handheld screen. You know people are talking about you constantly, Lyra said. Ethan glanced up. That sounds unhealthy. Most researchers would be excited. Most researchers are probably smarter than me. Lyra frowned. You repaired a thermal distribution network that 3 specialists failed to diagnose. The specialists had advanced degrees. Exactly. I had access to the maintenance logs. The elevator doors opened before she could argue further. Ethan lifted 2 power cells from the stack. Each unit weighed nearly 80 pounds according to the equipment label. He carried both under one arm and walked into the corridor. Lyra followed. The support rings stretched in a massive circle around the station's exterior layers. Long maintenance passages curved along the hull like arteries carrying life through a giant metal organism. Blue status lights glowed at regular intervals. Air recyclers produced a steady background hum. Somewhere deeper in the structure, coolant pumps pulsed rhythmically through reinforced pipes. The assignment appeared simple. A relay station needed replacement components. Ethan installed the first power cell in less than 5 minutes. Then something unexpected happened. A maintenance drone emerged from a side access tunnel. The machine moved erratically, its navigation systems clearly malfunctioning. One of its stabilizers flickered. The drone drifted sideways and bumped repeatedly against a wall panel. Lyra expected Ethan to ignore it. It was not part of his assignment. Instead, he crouched beside the machine. Well, that explains your bad day. The drone emitted a confused sequence of tones. Ethan removed a small multi-tool from his pocket. Within moments, he was adjusting a damaged sensor mount. The machine's status lights shifted from amber to green. The drone rotated once, then emitted a cheerful confirmation signal before continuing down the corridor. Lyra stared. You stopped working to repair a repair machine. Ethan shrugged. It looked frustrated. It is an automated utility unit. Still looked frustrated. Lyra could not decide whether he was joking. The troubling part was that she suspected he was not. They continued through the corridor network until they reached a viewing gallery overlooking the Academy's primary transit hub. Hundreds of students moved below like streams flowing through a canyon of steel and glass. Shuttles arrived and departed in carefully coordinated patterns. Freight vehicles crossed elevated pathways suspended above the central plaza. Ethan paused near the observation window. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The station lights reflected across the glass. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you help every problem you see? Ethan looked down toward the crowded transit levels. His answer came slowly. Back home, most people help because one day they might be the person who needs help. Lyra considered that. That is not a scientific explanation. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. Good thing I am not a scientist. The answer should have sounded simple. Instead, it lingered in her thoughts long after they left the viewing gallery. Because the more she observed humans, the more she realized their strength was not contained inside muscles or bones or gravity adaptation. It appeared in choices so ordinary that most humans never even thought to mention them. 2 weeks into the observation program, something unusual happened. The questions began changing. At first, the Academy researchers had focused entirely on physical measurements. They wanted to understand how humans endured higher gravity, why their skeletal structures remained stable under constant stress, and how their muscles generated such reliable output. Charts filled conference rooms. Simulations ran day and night. Yet slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the conversation shifted. Students stopped asking how humans survived. They started asking why they behaved the way they did. Lyra realized this while reviewing observation logs inside the xenobiology archives. Hundreds of entries filled the database. Ethan repaired a damaged water recycler. Ethan helped a lost first-year student find the navigation center. Ethan stayed an extra hour to assist a technician whose shift had ended late. None of these actions appeared remarkable when viewed individually. Together, however, they formed a pattern that no research model could adequately explain. A soft rain tapped against the transparent dome above the archive wing. Artificial weather systems had been installed years earlier to create familiar environments for species from diverse worlds. Tiny droplets slid down the curved glass ceiling while muted afternoon light filtered into the room. Lyra sat alone among towering shelves of data crystals when her communicator chimed. Maintenance request completed. Subject available for follow-up observation. She glanced at the timestamp. Ethan had finished another assignment nearly 40 minutes ahead of schedule. Curious, she left the archive and followed the station map toward one of the smaller recreation levels near the residential sector. The recreation deck overlooked a vast indoor botanical garden nearly half a mile wide. Trees from dozens of planets grew beneath carefully regulated climate zones. Small streams wound between stone pathways. Warm light from overhead solar arrays created the illusion of a peaceful afternoon despite the endless vacuum outside the station walls. Lyra expected to find Ethan heading toward his next assignment. Instead, she spotted him sitting alone on a wooden bench near a pond filled with silver aquatic creatures. For the first time since she had met him, he was doing absolutely nothing. No tools, no repairs, no schedules. He simply sat there holding a paper cup of coffee while watching the water. The moment felt strangely important. She approached carefully. "You are not working." Ethan looked up and smiled. "That is because it is my lunch break. You take breaks." "Usually." He gestured toward the empty space beside him. "You can sit if you want." Lyra hesitated before accepting. The bench felt surprisingly comfortable. For several minutes, neither spoke. The only sounds came from distant water pumps and the gentle rustle of leaves overhead. Eventually, Lyra glanced toward him. "Can I ask another question?" "You always do." "What do humans think about when they are resting?" Ethan laughed softly. "That depends on the human." "And you?" He stared across the pond. "Home, sometimes." The answer surprised her. "Earth? Earth." His voice carried a quiet warmth she had never heard before. "My parents still live there. Small town. Lots of trees. Summers are hot. Winters are cold. Nothing exciting." Lyra found herself smiling. "You describe your home the same way you describe fixing a coolant pump. That is because both are familiar." Another silence settled between them. Comfortable this time. Not awkward. The kind that required no explanation. Lyra watched reflections ripple across the pond's surface. For weeks, she had examined humans through reports, recordings, and observations. Yet sitting beside Ethan now, she felt as though she was finally seeing something the data never captured. Not strength, not endurance, not adaptation. Simplicity. A species capable of surviving immense pressure, yet still finding peace in a quiet moment beside a pond. Ethan took a sip of coffee and looked toward the artificial sky above the garden. "Funny thing about gravity," he said. Lyra turned toward him. "What?" "People spend so much time studying how much weight something can carry." He watched a silver fish break the water's surface before disappearing again. "Most of the time, what matters is what makes carrying it worthwhile." For once, Lyra did not write down the statement. She simply listened. The debate began 3 days later in the Academy's largest lecture hall. More than 800 students filled the ascending rows of seats beneath a ceiling covered in moving holographic star maps. Light from distant galaxies drifted across polished metal walls, while translation systems quietly synchronized hundreds of languages in real time. Normally, academic symposiums attracted specialists and little attention from the general student population. This one was different. Every seat was occupied. Additional viewers watched through live network feeds across the station. The topic displayed above the stage seemed straightforward enough: human adaptation and environmental resilience. Yet everyone understood the real question hiding beneath the title. What exactly made humans different? Professor Darnis stood beneath the projection screens and adjusted his glasses. Behind him floated decades of scientific data. Charts detailed bone density, muscle composition, cardiovascular efficiency, oxygen utilization. Every measurable aspect of human physiology appeared in neat rows of statistics. "The evidence is clear," Darnis announced. "Human resilience is primarily the result of environmental pressure. Earth's gravity, climate variation, and evolutionary history produced a species capable of tolerating conditions that would challenge many others." Several professors nodded. The explanation sounded logical, scientific, complete. Then another researcher stood. Dr. Selen Voss was one of the Academy's leading comparative biologists. "With respect," he replied, "the current analysis may be overestimating the significance of environmental adaptation." A murmur spread through the audience. Darnis frowned. "On what basis?" "Behavioral evidence." New charts appeared above the stage. Observation records, maintenance reports, volunteer assistance logs. Community support metrics. The audience immediately recognized the source. Ethan Walker. Physical adaptation explains why a human can function under higher gravity. Selin continued. It does not explain why that same individual repeatedly assists others when there is no measurable benefit. The room grew quieter. Lyra sat near the front row, reviewing the data she had personally submitted. Seeing it displayed before hundreds of people felt strangely unsettling. Compassion is not unique to humans, Darnus argued. Of course not, Selin replied. But frequency matters. Human cooperative behavior consistently exceeds predictive models. More charts appeared. Recorded observations from Earth colonies, trade stations, research outposts, emergency shelters. Again and again, similar patterns emerged. Humans carrying responsibilities beyond what was required. Helping strangers, sharing resources, solving problems that technically belong to someone else. Darnus crossed his arms. That is culture, not biology. Perhaps. Selin smiled slightly. Then why does it appear across thousands of human cultures? No one answered immediately. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. Gravity, evolution, psychology, sociology. Every explanation revealed another question. Every answer seemed incomplete. Eventually, the symposium ended without reaching a conclusion. Students poured from the hall still arguing. The debate spread through corridors, cafeterias, and research forums before the session had even officially concluded. Later that evening, Lyra found Ethan replacing a damaged environmental sensor near the Academy's western observation ring. The station lights were dimmer at night. Through nearby windows, stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. Ethan tightened the final bolt and stepped back from the panel. You look like someone assigned extra homework, he said. Lyra folded her arms. The Academy spent 2 hours debating why humans behave the way they do. That sounds exhausting. You are the reason for the debate. Ethan laughed softly. Poor Academy. They cannot explain you. There is not much to explain. Lyra shook her head. That answer is becoming increasingly frustrating. Ethan gathered his tools and closed the maintenance case. For a moment, he seemed to consider something. Then he looked through the observation window toward the distant stars. Maybe people spend too much time looking for complicated answers. And the simple answer? Lyra asked. Ethan shrugged. Most humans wake up every morning hoping to leave things a little better than they found them. The words sounded almost disappointingly ordinary. Yet standing there beneath the glow of distant starlight, Lyra realized why the Academy kept struggling to understand him. They were searching for an extraordinary explanation. What they kept finding instead was an ordinary man making ordinary choices. Somehow, that was proving far more difficult to explain. The incident began at 2:17 in the morning station time. Most of the Academy was asleep. Lecture halls sat empty beneath dimmed lights. Research labs operated with skeleton crews. Even the endless flow of cargo traffic had slowed to a quiet trickle. Lyra was still awake. A deadline for her latest report had kept her in the xenobiology wing long after midnight. The archive room glowed with soft blue light from suspended data displays. Outside the tall observation windows, stars drifted silently across the darkness. She was reviewing observation logs when every screen in the room suddenly flickered. For half a second the lights dimmed. Then the emergency alarms began. The sound echoed through the station like a metallic heartbeat. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable. Lyra shot to her feet. Red warning indicators flashed across every display panel. Environmental systems shifted into emergency mode. A cold voice emerged from overhead speakers. Gravity containment instability detected. Sector 8 through Sector 12. All personnel proceed to designated safety zones. Lyra felt her stomach tighten. Gravity containment. The words immediately pulled her thoughts back to the testing accident weeks earlier. She grabbed her communicator and rushed into the corridor. Doors slid open across the research wing as confused students and technicians emerged from their quarters. Some carried emergency kits. Others simply looked frightened. The alarms continued. Containment failure escalating. Technical response teams requested immediately. The station floor seemed normal beneath her feet. Then she felt it. A subtle change. Almost imperceptible at first. The weight pressing downward grew slightly heavier. Several students slowed. One reached for a wall rail. Another stumbled before regaining balance. The gravity field was fluctuating. This is not good, Someone whispered nearby. Lyra checked the emergency map on her communicator. A cluster of warning symbols flashed near the central infrastructure levels. Unfortunately, that section connected directly to several residential blocks and primary transit corridors. If the instability spread, thousands of people could become trapped. The crowd around her began moving toward evacuation routes. Then another announcement echoed through the station. Technical personnel requested at Core Distribution Junction 7. Lyra already knew who would answer that call. She activated a tracking request through the maintenance network. Ethan Walker's location appeared almost instantly. Core Distribution Junction 7. Her heart sank. Of course he was already there. She changed direction immediately. The journey took nearly 10 minutes. During that time the station grew noticeably heavier. Not enough to immobilize anyone. Not yet. But enough to make movement uncomfortable. By the time Lyra reached the infrastructure sector, perspiration had formed along her forehead. The air smelled faintly of overheated electronics. Emergency lighting painted the corridors in pulses of red and amber. She rounded a corner and found dozens of technicians gathered outside a reinforced bulkhead. Diagnostic screens filled the wall with streams of warning messages. Gravity levels were rising throughout the affected sectors. Engineers argued over solutions. Administrators coordinated evacuations. Nobody appeared calm. Except Ethan. He stood near the center console, studying a projection of the station's gravity network. His maintenance jacket was unzipped. A toolkit rested beside his boots. While everyone else rushed between terminals, Ethan listened quietly. Asked questions. Examined readings. The same way he approached every broken machine. Lyra pushed through the crowd. Tell me this is under control. Ethan looked up. For a brief moment his expression remained unreadable. Then he offered a small smile. I would love to tell you that. The answer immediately worried her. Ethan rarely sounded uncertain. Behind him, warning indicators shifted from orange to red. A technician pointed toward the central display. The fluctuations are accelerating. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the numbers climbing across the screen. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Lyra felt genuine fear. Not because the gravity was increasing. Not because the systems were failing. Because she noticed where Ethan was looking. He was not watching the equipment. He was watching the evacuation routes. As though he had already begun thinking about the people who might still be trapped when things became worse. The next 15 minutes would later become required study material at the academy. Not because of the system failure itself. Engineers eventually determined the cause. They repaired the damaged network. They updated safety protocols and redesigned several control redundancies. The technical problem was solved. What nobody forgot was what happened while the problem was still unfolding. The gravity readings continued climbing. Across multiple sectors, movement became increasingly difficult. Emergency responders reported stalled evacuation groups. Cargo lifts shut down automatically. Several transit corridors became inaccessible as safety systems attempted to isolate affected areas. Inside Core Distribution Junction 7, the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing minute. Sweat glistened across foreheads. Voices became strained. Even simple movements required more effort than before. The central display flashed warning after warning. We need another 20 minutes, one engineer announced. The stabilization sequence is not ready. We do not have 20 minutes, another replied. A new alert appeared on the main screen. Residential Sector 11. Population remaining, 43. The room went silent. 43 people were still inside the affected zone. Most were students. Several were support staff. Some had likely been asleep when the emergency began. Evacuation teams had already reached their operational limits. Conditions inside the sector were becoming too difficult for many species to navigate safely. Ethan studied the numbers for only a second. Then he reached for his maintenance kit. Lyra immediately understood what he was about to do. No, Ethan looked up. No. You are not going in there. Someone has to. Emergency teams are already responding. The emergency teams are carrying people out one at a time. He clipped the communicator onto his jacket. That takes too long. The simplicity of the statement made it worse. He was not trying to sound heroic. He was calculating, solving a problem, the same way he always did. Lyra stepped closer. The gravity is still rising. Ethan nodded. I know. You could get trapped. Then I will walk faster. Several nearby technicians exchanged glances. Under normal circumstances, the comment might have sounded humorous. Nobody laughed. Ethan checked a portable diagnostic scanner and headed toward the bulkhead. The massive doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Beyond them stretched a corridor illuminated by flashing emergency lights. The floor seemed to vibrate beneath the growing strain on the station systems. Ethan. He paused. Lyra rarely used his first name with that tone. Be careful. For a moment, the noise of alarms seemed to fade. Ethan offered the same calm smile she had seen dozens of times before. I always try to be. Then he disappeared into the corridor. What followed reached the command center through fragmented reports. Ethan located isolated students and directed them toward functioning evacuation routes. He assisted technicians struggling with equipment. He cleared blocked access points and restored communication relays. Again and again, his location appeared across emergency tracking systems as he moved through sectors many others could barely navigate. The gravity continued increasing, yet the evacuation numbers steadily dropped. 38 remaining. 31. 22. 15. 8. Every update brought visible relief to the engineers monitoring the operation. Then the numbers stopped changing. Population remaining, 3. A new warning appeared. Transit Corridor 12. Structural lockout activated. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. The remaining individuals were trapped beyond a sealed emergency bulkhead. The control systems refused to reopen it until stabilization finished. Estimated delay, 11 minutes. Nobody in the room liked that number. Through the emergency network, Ethan's signal moved directly toward the corridor. He arrived less than 2 minutes later. The command staff watched through a security feed as he examined the sealed passageway. He listened to instructions, checked the emergency override housing, evaluated the situation. Then he did something that made everyone stop talking. He sat down beside the door. What is he doing? Someone whispered. Ethan activated his communicator. His voice crackled through the speakers. 3 people are safe on the other side. Relief swept through the room. Then he added, they are scared. Silence returned. Through the monitor, Ethan leaned back against the wall beside the sealed bulkhead. He remained there talking to them through the emergency intercom while engineers completed the stabilization sequence. Not because he could fix the door. Not because he could accelerate the repairs. Simply because nobody should have to wait alone. The stabilization sequence completed at 2:49 in the morning. Across the academy, warning lights faded from red to amber, then from amber to normal white. The constant alarm that had echoed through the station finally fell silent. One by one, gravity readings returned to standard levels. Exhausted technicians leaned against consoles. Engineers removed emergency headsets. For the first time in nearly an hour, people breathed normally again. Inside Core Distribution Junction 7, nobody celebrated. Not yet. Every eye remained fixed on the security monitor displaying Transit Corridor 12. The sealed bulkhead stood motionless beneath the corridor lights. Then the locking mechanisms disengaged. A green status indicator appeared. The heavy door slowly slid open. 3 frightened students emerged first. They looked tired and shaken, but unharmed. The moment they stepped through the doorway, relief swept across the command center. Several people applauded. Others simply closed their eyes and exhaled. Then Ethan appeared. He walked through the opening carrying his maintenance kit in one hand. No dramatic entrance. No speech. No expression of triumph. He looked exactly like a man finishing a long shift. The room remained strangely quiet. Lyra realized why a moment later. Everyone had expected something extraordinary. Instead, Ethan simply nodded toward the nearest technician. Looks like the repairs worked. The technician stared at him. That is your first comment. Ethan looked genuinely confused. Should it not be? Laughter spread through the room. Tired laughter. Relieved laughter. The kind that arrived only after fear finally released its grip. Over the following days, official investigations filled hundreds of pages. Engineers documented every technical detail. Administrators reviewed emergency procedures. Academic departments collected behavioral observations from the event. The academy wanted answers. As always, they found more questions. 1 week later, a special symposium was held inside the central auditorium. Attendance exceeded every expectation. Students crowded every available seat. Professors stood along the walls. Visitors connected through remote feeds from universities across known space. Near the center of the stage stood Lyra Vane. Her final research report hovered above the audience in the form of a rotating holographic display. Months earlier, she had begun a simple assignment. Study human adaptation. Understand Earth's gravity. Analyze resilience. The project now felt almost laughably incomplete. She looked across the audience before beginning. When this research started, she said, we believed the defining characteristic of humans was environmental adaptation. Data appeared behind her. Earth. Gravity. Atmospheric conditions. Evolutionary history. The familiar charts drew knowing nods from the audience. Then the images changed. Maintenance corridors. Observation decks. Cargo lifts. Emergency shelters. A botanical garden beside a quiet pond. And finally, a single image from Transit Corridor 12. Ethan sitting beside a sealed door while frightened students waited on the other side. The auditorium became silent. We were wrong, Lyra continued softly. Gravity explains how humans endure pressure. It does not explain why they choose to carry the burdens of others. No one interrupted. No one looked away. We spent years studying Earth's gravity. We measured its force. We modeled its effects. We analyzed every possible variable. She paused. Then one human taught us something our equations never considered. The final image appeared above the stage. Not a chart. Not a scientific model. Simply a photograph of Ethan Walker drinking coffee during a lunch break beside the Academy pond. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Human. Strength is not what humans carry, Lyra said. It is what they carry for each other. Later that evening, long after the symposium ended, she found Ethan standing alone in the observation gallery overlooking the stars. The station lights reflected softly across the glass. Below them, entire worlds drifted through the darkness. I read your report, Ethan said. And you made me sound more impressive than I am. Lyra smiled. That is because you still do not understand what everyone else sees. Ethan folded his arms and looked toward the distant glow of Earth hanging like a blue jewel among the stars. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra finally understood something that had eluded researchers for months. The Academy had spent years analyzing the weight of a world. Yet the thing that astonished them most was not Earth's gravity. It was the quiet human habit of lifting others without ever asking for recognition. And somewhere beyond the glass, beneath the gravity that had shaped his entire life, a small blue planet continued turning through the darkness, unaware that its greatest lesson had never been strength at all. It had always been kindness.